Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Oxford Internet Institute's next Wednesday webinar, From Facial Recognition Technology to Children Online, Regulating Data Protection in 2021, featuring Elizabeth Denham CBE, hosted by Professor Victoria Nash. A little housekeeping: we are fortunate to have a varied audience with a wide range of view, and we request that the opinions of others are respected in this space. For your awareness, this event is being recorded and will be posted on our website following the event. You can pose any question using the Q&A tab at any time, and these will be answered towards the end of the talk. Please keep questions as concise as possible. The questions will be visible to all attendees, and you can upvote and comment upon them, and we'll endeavour to follow up on any unanswered queries. Please allow me to introduce Victoria and Elizabeth.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction and for letting us run this event today, Isabel. My name is Vicky Nash, and I'm Deputy Director of the Oxford Internet Institute and Senior Policy Fellow. And I'm so delighted today to welcome our guest, Elizabeth Denham. Elizabeth Denham, as you may know, obviously is the UK's Information Commissioner. She's been in the role since 2016, and this is her last year before she finishes up in 2018. She has an incredible history in the field. She's previously worked as Information and Privacy Commissioner in British Columbia, Assistant Privacy Commissioner of Canada. So if you want to speak to somebody who has an incredible wealth of experience and insight into the challenges posed by data protection in the digital age, then this is the speaker for us. I'm going to kick over to Elizabeth in a second for a presentation. She'll talk, I think, about 15 minutes. Then we'll have around about 20 minutes of conversation between her and myself, and we'll be inviting all of you to submit questions in the Q&A section, and we'll go through those largely in order of popularity. And with that, Elizabeth, perhaps I can hand over to you. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us today.
Yeah, delighted to be here and thrilled with the invitation. As some of you may know, I was due to deliver a presentation, a webinar in person in March of 2020. And does that ever sound like a long time ago? But at that time, I thought March 2020 was the perfect time to talk to you about our office's work. It felt like data privacy had come of age. It felt like data privacy was mainstream, and that the work of my office was more relevant than ever. Little did I know what the next year was going to bring. So contact tracing apps, health data stats as headlines in the news, temperature checking at airports, businesses collecting contact details of all their customers, employers asking directly about the health status of their employees, and vaccine passports and certificates. My office has been at the center of so many of those key issues that have had a very real impact on individuals over the past year. And that's before you factor in all of our business as usual work, all of our statutory work that we need to do, which became even more important alongside the unprecedented acceleration of data-driven services. So it feels like March 2021 is actually the perfect time for me to address you and all of the audience today, Vicky. I can't possibly cover all the work of my office in a 15-minute set of prepared remarks. So I thought today that I would talk to you about some key cases, a handful of cases, which I have chosen because they illustrate two main points. One, they show the challenge of modern data protection work, the knotty questions and the sometimes subjective answers and judgments in privacy regulation today. And secondly, these cases really illustrate the value of data protection, not as a tick box exercise and not as a baseline legal compliance issue, but as a means of securing public trust in innovation. But before I start, just a brief introduction to my role. And I think most of you in the audience today know that the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, regulates data protection, but we also regulate the transparency agenda and freedom of information laws, and we oversee a handful of statutes around information rights. So that's the dry introduction, but the more interesting detail is in how we regulate in our digital world and how we encourage trust in the way that personal information is used to support innovation, support economic growth, and societal benefits, data for good. For instance, last year, when I looked at our helpline and our advisory service stats, we took calls, we took written inquiries from over 500,000 UK citizens and consumers. And so that's a lot of people who are aware of their information rights and who cared enough about those rights to speak to the regulator. It also includes thousands of businesses who were aware that the rights of their customers and who cared about supporting the rights to ask for our help at the ICO. And while I know that the work of our office that really grabs the headlines is usually around fines and it's around enforcement action, like the £20 million fine that we handed to British Airways, most of the resources in our office go to supporting organizations to comply with the law. That's the unsexy piece that people don't see in the headlines. And that's not just about the guidance that we produce, but it's also projects like our sandbox, where we sit down with organizations to beta test their innovations around data and work on those knotty, complex problems side by side. So essentially, my role is around supporting trust in innovative data use. Data protection was born in the 1970s, really out of a concern that the potential of emerging technology would be lost if we didn't embrace innovation. And I think that's so incredibly relevant today. Trust remains central to successful innovation. And I think the past year has been a prime example of the importance of trust. If you take the NHSX contact tracing app, my view is that the ICO was invited into the tent with government, into the conversations around developing the app at a very early stage, not just because NHSX had a burning desire to comply with the law, of course they did, but because the NHSX appreciated the importance of building the trust of the public. That meant respecting personal data and getting the regulator on side. A lack of public trust in the app would have meant a lack of engagement with the app. And the benefits of that service that the service offered to society would have been lost. And as an interesting aside, I find it fascinating to see how society's views on privacy shift and adjust to reflect the broader context. Who listening today, if asked last February, would have been willing to download an app operated by the state that tracked who you had been in proximity with? But faced with the challenges of a global pandemic and given the reassurance around privacy, the app was downloaded more than 21 million times. So the project worked because it had public trust. And trust will be just as central as the government turns its attention to the next big challenge, which is, will people engage with vaccination passports? And this is work that the ICO is already engaged in, both around the potential for domestic use of a vaccine passport, but also the international use of a vaccine passport for travel. And privacy questions need to be considered not as a bolt-on at the end of a process, but right at the beginning, at the earliest stage of development. But that doesn't mean that there are easy answers. So what does a fair scheme of vaccine passports look like? How much personal data is an individual going to be asked to share if, for instance, they have chosen not to have a vaccine either because they're pregnant, they're taking medication for an existing condition? And what prevents a scheme aimed at, say, those working just in care homes versus those working in restaurants? So these are key data protection questions because they're about the collection and disclosure of data, but they're also societal questions. And societal questions, by their very nature, can't be answered just by government or just by scientists or just by regulators in isolation. The only way to find the answers, the only way to reach a solution to encourage public trust is to engage the public, to speak to individuals, to speak to civil society, to talk about the data that's being used. So consultation feels absolutely critical. And consultation was certainly central to the ICO's work in a different area across the last 2 years, the use of children's personal data by online services. And this has been a crucial and a fascinating area of focus for my office, and a complex area too. So starting with a quick question, if we were all in the same room, I'd ask for a quick show of hands. But how old should children be before they can use social media? US law around children's personal information has the effect of setting that age at 13. And maybe that sounds sensible. But then the question gets more complex. What if someone's news feed is increasingly pushing them towards the direction of content about self-harm or content about extreme dieting? Does that make us want to up the age for social media? And how is that minimum age affected by apps that track the user's location, or apps that use nudge techniques to encourage people to log on more, to keep the eyeballs online, or to share more information about themselves? So I would say that's a wickedly complex problem. The internet was not designed with children in mind, but we all recognize the benefits of encouraging kids to go online. And we have protections and rules for kids in the offline world, but they haven't been translated to the online world. In the UK, our answer in part is the age-appropriate design code. And I know, Vicky, your research is very much in this area, so I'll look forward to talking to you about that. But this age-appropriate design code has been a big part of our office's work over the past 2 years, and it is built on consultation with individuals, with parents, with carers, with teachers, with tech companies, and with academics, and of course, with the children themselves. The result is a code that requires businesses that are selling services into the UK to take account of 15 standards around issues like behavioral advertising, like geolocation, and high privacy settings by default. This week, marks 6 months until the code is fully in force. And there's still plenty of work to do, both by my office in supporting organizations and our expectations that businesses are stepping up to make the necessary engineering and design changes. But that work is going to have such a huge impact on children online. It's incredibly worthwhile. It's an important piece of work in protecting children online. And I think in the coming 5 to 10 years, I believe that many jurisdictions around the world will adopt similar codes, and we will find it astonishing that there was ever a time when these kind of mandatory protections were not in place for kids. And there's a more fundamental point here too. If we have a generation who grew up seeing digital services misuse their agency, misuse their personal data, what does that do to their trust in innovation in the future? Trust in innovation is critical. And I've seen that firsthand over the past couple of years in the loss of innovation when trust is lost. Early in 2020, when we could still travel, I was in San Francisco to meet with Silicon Valley tech leaders. And we think of San Francisco and Silicon Valley as synonymous with innovation. And yet our own city is likely to have technology that San Francisco doesn't. And that is police forces using facial recognition technology. Facial recognition technology allows police forces to overlay CCTV with software that can identify people from the shape of their brow or the shape of their nose and check whether or not they're wanted for a serious crime. And police forces in the UK have been quick to trial the use of facial recognition technology, which gives them the ability to identify a criminal in a crowd of thousands. So when I talk to people on the street, they say, well, that's great, isn't it? We all want criminals caught. But how much are we willing to give up for that increased safety? Because the technology also captures the biometrics of all of us as we go about our lawful activities. Facial recognition technology is a step change in society. And it asks questions not only about data protection, but also about society's relationship with police and how far we're willing to go to trust technological innovation. In the UK, courts have decided that police using facial recognition technology can be lawful and can be reasonable. My office has also intervened by issuing a formal opinion on the use of facial recognition technology by police forces. And we have been clear that FRT processes sensitive data, biometrics, and so the law places a very high threshold or a very high bar before that technology can be rolled out. But in San Francisco, the city decided that the best approach was a blanket ban on police use of the technology. So people didn't trust FRT, and so any benefits that it could have offered have been lost. So I think that's an instructive example. The UK economy, in touch and in line with much of the rest of the world, enters 2021 in recovery mode. Our experience over the past 12 months suggests that digital and data-driven innovation will be central to that recovery. But we can only unlock the benefits of innovation if innovation benefits from the full support of the public. So from FRT to NHSX contact tracing apps, I've seen that demonstrating good data protection compliance, so transparency and fairness and proportionality, are absolutely crucial in building and maintaining public trust that maximizes the ongoing impact of innovation. If the UK economy is to make the most of this moment of opportunity, then we have to think about how we ensure that as many people as possible understand how their data is contributing in a positive way, data for good. We need to be building in privacy protections from the start, privacy by design. We need to be taking the time to explain to people how their data is being used, even when that is difficult. We need to be asking ourselves not what can we do with people's data, but what is fair. We need to be thinking about people. So I hope that gives you a bit of an overview of the challenges and the value of modern data protection regulation. And I look forward, Vicky, to our fireside chat and also questions from participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's wonderful. I do feel it's always really unfair doing these things on Zoom. You can't hear the round of applause that would be given if you were sitting in our seminar room at One St Giles. I think you've just done a fantastic job there for me of giving an insight into what the role of a truly modern data protection authority is like. The types of challenge and opportunity that you've just set out give really vivid colour, I think, to the sort of the facts that most of us know, which is that sort of this sort of mass collection of our data, digital data on a daily basis, is giving rise to incredible opportunities, sort of products and technologies that we use and benefit from, but also at the same time possible challenges in ensuring that our privacy rights are maintained and upheld. So yes, we'll hopefully sort of talk through more some of the applications and the challenges, opportunities that come with those in the questions. But you mentioned that obviously some of this does cross over very much with my work. So maybe let's sort of start there. I'm very selfish. I'd like to cover that first. On this topic of age-appropriate design, I mean, I think this is somewhere where the UK is genuinely field leading, and I'm really grateful to Bevan Kidron for sort of kicking off this debate in the House of Lords with her amendment to the UK data protection laws. But it's such a thorny issue, isn't it? I mean, I think one of the questions that really rises for me, I suppose, is how far, on the one hand, and you always balance, sort of opportunities and potential benefits. How far does this, on the one hand, protect children better, more effectively? Does it ensure that companies will take their best interests into account at every step of the way? And how much does it risk cutting off those benefits by, if you like, imposing companies just seeing it as just too costly, even if it's not, even if actually it would open up new markets? How do we ensure that we don't just see, if you like, effectively an age-gated internet, which children are increasingly not allowed into? Where do you think you'll go with that?
I think, as I said, I agree with you. The UK is leading in this with the 15 standards in the age-appropriate design code. And I know that jurisdictions like Australia and Canada and California are looking very closely, Mexico as well, looking very closely at how we're approaching this. And is it costly? I think what we need to do is incentivize companies, and particularly the social media platforms where kids' eyeballs are drawn. We have to incentivize them to make these services children friendly. And we need to protect our kids online in the same way that we protect them offline. They can't buy cigarettes until they're 16. They can't go to certain movies, et cetera, et cetera. But what we don't want to do, and what is an old-fashioned approach, is an age-gated internet. So, just having either allowing a child on a site or not allowing a child on site doesn't actually account for the levels of maturity that a 16-year-old has can make decisions better than a 13-year-old. But I do think that especially the services that know that children are on the site, legitimately on the site, that they make their experiences work for their level of maturity. And high privacy defaults, so high privacy standards by default, which means geolocation turned off, it means profiles limited, it means sharing with third parties limited. These only make sense in the kind of world that we operate, the kind of harms that are online, but also we want kids to have a positive experience online, not just a door open and shut. And when I went to Silicon Valley, San Francisco last year, when I met with all of the chief executives of the big companies, they were anxious. Their engineers were meeting with our engineers to figure out how to make this work. And it just can't go in the too hard pile. And we're working with industry associations, working with small developing entrepreneurs in our sandbox to make this work. So I'm optimistic and proud, Vicki, of the work that we've done.
No, I think you should be. And obviously, clearly, we're still in the transition period. So we're also looking forward to seeing what comes out of it at the other end and how companies are going to adapt. But it is great to know that you also were aware of sort of the trade-offs and have been working with companies to prevent them just, yes, en masse blocking children from their services. So another area where clearly the ICO's office has had a sort of really big impact, and where you know, to speak to this theme of trust that you've mentioned, where that's been so important, is around data and democracy. Obviously, you conducted an investigation into Cambridge Analytica and political campaigning, but you know, we still continue to wonder, if you like, what impact these big questions about irresponsible data use will have on our belief in democracy. So, do you think this is an area where the role of the ICO is one that can build trust in the future, or you think, you know, are we fighting a bit of a losing battle on this one?
I'm, again, optimistic in this area of data and democracy as well. When we looked at Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and the misuse of data in political campaigns, we looked at the whole ecosystem. You know, we looked at what political parties were doing. We looked at what data analytics companies were doing. We worked with the Electoral Commission in their area of regulation. And I think what we did was pull back the curtain on how campaigns were increasingly data intensive. So rather than door knocking and collecting data, you know, weather permitting, now more and more political campaigns happen online, and they happen by profiling and targeting individuals. And again, you talked about that balance earlier. What we're trying to achieve in data and democracy is transparent, fair use of data, because political campaigns require the use of data. So where's the sweet spot? And I think the sweet spot is in ensuring that people understand how their data is collected, that they have agency and control over that data, that they can challenge a platform or a political campaign or party in the use of that data. So we have a new political code coming out in the next couple of weeks that is going to clarify the rules around political campaigning when it comes to data. And I think, again, that will help. People are more aware of how they can be targeted in political campaigns than ever before.
No, and it's clearly, if nothing else, you mentioned the point about education earlier and how essential it is that people really understand how their data is collected, how it's analysed, and how it's used. And so I suppose that is the other hope, isn't it? That with every story like this, people just understand a little bit more about what's at stake here. So again, there's an educational role, I think, to your actions. You, in that last answer, you know, you mentioned the Electoral Commission. And again, this is another feature, I think, isn't it, of sort of modern data protection regulation, that you really do have to act in step with other regulators. So not just that commission, also perhaps with, you know, competition regulators. In the UK, we'll have online harms legislation coming through with Ofcom. So what does, you know, does this make it easier, or does this make it harder? And perhaps what does good joined up regulation look like?
I think when it comes to the regulation of the digital economy, we need joined up regulation, because there aren't clear boundaries between what consumer and competition regulators are doing, what our communications regulator, Ofcom, will be doing with online harms, and what the data protection regulator is doing. So I think the UK is out in front when it comes to the digital regulators working together. And I think we're less concerned about perimeter issues. We're more concerned about gaps in the regulation. So it's obvious that content regulation is an area of public concern, that content needs to be better regulated online, but content is determined by data. So data profiles is the way in which content is delivered. So you can see in that example how data protection needs to work with a competition regulator. The Ofcom and the CMA and the ICO have banded together in a new cooperative forum where we've seconded staff, and we have a program of work to be able to make this easier and more straightforward for business and better protect consumers. So we're not defending our perimeters, we're figuring out which is the best regulatory lever to solve the problem. And I think that's the way it has to go in the future. There just aren't sharp edges and sharp lines between our areas of focus and our mandates.
And a lot of that presumably will also be driven simply by personal relationships at the head of those agencies. I mean, it's really important that yeah, you can all talk and work well together and on these issues. So we'll see what happens on that. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to open it up to the floor because we've got loads coming in. I thought it was great that you kicked off with so much conversation about our COVID experiences, partly because I think there will be a period perhaps of reckoning when this is all over, where we do look at the apps and tools and the forms of data collection that became so normal, and we will want to know as academics, for example, how they affected our understanding of privacy, how they affected our relationships with the state, with the health sector, and so on. But so I just wondered, from your perspective, given that you've placed this huge emphasis on building public trust and also understanding that public trust and attitudes change, what do you think will have been the result of our experience with COVID and handing over so much data? Would it have increased our trust, our understanding of how our personal data can be used for public good? Or do you think there'll be a backlash? Yeah, which direction is it going in?
It's hard to say what direction it's going in, but it's very dependent on what government does next. So we can all understand that during a global pandemic, during the what has happened with managing the pandemic and also coming out of the pandemic and economic recovery, I think people expect their data to be used, but they also expect that what has become normal during the pandemic will be decommissioned in the after we come out of the pandemic, or if not, if there's a new way of using data that contributes to societal good, that people will understand and have validators and regulators to say it's okay, because people expect someone to have their back. And test and trace, you can see that's a system that needs to be decommissioned. We've already advised, using our mandatory audit powers, that the ICO will be auditing the test and trace program. We're looking at the app in the same way that needs to be decommissioned. So anything that's sticky, anything that is still in use, in service afterwards, again, has to be trusted by the public. And they have to be able to challenge that through parliamentarians and civil society group, academia, etc.
I agree, that'd be so important. Is it Singapore, I think, where there's been some sort of mission creep in terms of how the data for track and trace is being used by government? Yes. So yeah, we must avoid that scenario, I think, at all costs.
Yeah, I think it's used by the police, and there was a promise made to the public that the collection of the data for the app would just be used for a public health emergency, not for anything else. And so that's a very good case in point.
Yeah, exactly. Right, let's go to the questions. So gosh, there's 20 or so coming in already. Top question here from Emma Hine. What are your thoughts on the risk of vaccine passports normalising government surveillance of individual health status?
I think that's a great question, because again, it goes to what I just said about how sticky are these initiatives going to be post-pandemic. And I think all of us see the value in vaccine passports. So as we open up again, as the economy opens up again, as we travel again, that it would be normal to be able to prove that you've been vaccinated or that you've been tested, et cetera, et cetera. But what wouldn't be normal is for the vaccine passports to be a backdoor to an identity card. And that's, that publicly having an identity card, having an identity system is not normalized in the UK. And we know that the past is littered with all kinds of initiatives that the public has just decided are not acceptable. So it goes back to that issue of public trust. Yes, during a pandemic, yes, during recovery, but the least amount of information necessary for the purpose is the principle that I will be espousing with government on the point of vaccine passports.
And just on something like that, I mean, you still chair the Global Privacy Assembly, for example? So would that be a way of having international conversations about how to ensure that those sort of standards, data minimization standards, are built in?
Yes, the Global Privacy Assembly, which is the professional group of all data protection authorities around the world, the ICO, I chair that group, and we are working on a paper, a statement about the design principles, the best practices for a vaccine passport. And I think that will, again, it has solidified the views around the world. And I think we'll be moving to a place that is both useful for the public, have this information shared, as well as protecting privacy and security of data.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense to have some collaboration on that. I'm going to ask the next question, but just a reminder to those of you that are listening, you can upvote questions. There's about 23 questions open. If you want to upvote some to ensure we ask the most popular ones, please do so. Okay, next question from somebody who didn't want to give their name. Question, yes, and I suspect lots of us are asking, what happens next with Cambridge Analytica? Are they just going to get away with it? You must be asked that so many times. We still want to know though.
Now, Cambridge Analytica is no longer operating. So we seized their servers in 2017, 2018. We finished our investigation. The company went into administration, didn't have their kit anymore, went into administration, and the company was also found criminally responsible for breaking data protection law. And the director of the company, through the insolvency services, has been struck from the register of directors. So things didn't turn out very well for Cambridge Analytica. On the other, I do want to say though, that misuse of data in political campaigns was not all about one company. So it was about actually looking at the entire ecosystem of all the players and improving the transparency and fairness in the use of data. What I think is important about Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, and all of the publicity and interest around that journalists and civil society and academics and parliamentarians put on that, is that it's a story that's well known. And I really think that the public finally sat up and took notice that the kind of technologies and processes that are used to sell us trainers and holidays were now being used to profile us and deliver messages to us based on our consumer history, and that wasn't okay. So that's the story of Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. It was a much bigger investigation than just two companies.
It's so useful to be reminded of that. And I think it also, to me, it gives me a sort of similar message in a way about the large fines that you've issued. I mean, one of the problems obviously for an organization like yours is you can't possibly investigate every single data protection breach or potential breach. And you have to go presumably for the biggest ones. And I suppose then at the end of the day, what we have to hope is that A, this does educate the public, so there's a better public understanding of how their data is being used or misused, but B, also that these serve as examples for other organisations that might find themselves, you know, conducting the same sorts of activities. So yes, I don't think we should see it as a criticism of the fact that Cambridge Analytica is no more, or that story gained so much sort of public attention. I think in itself that is very, very useful. Okay, complete change of topic, but back to facial recognition here. So we do have quite a few colleagues at OII and quite a few students who are interested in this. One of my colleagues, Bernie Hogan's asking, longish question here, reliable researchers have indicated how facial recognition is considerably more accurate for people of some race and genders than others. And in particular, Black women are less likely to be correctly identified than white men. How does this reconcile with the asserted use of these technologies by the police? For example, do they have access to different algorithms that have not been similarly tested and accounted for? Or I'm not quite sure I understand the last bit, are we benefiting from convenient propaganda? I think the question is, yes, are the technologies that are being used by police where they're allowed to do so, may they suffer from these same forms of discrimination and bias?
Yes, and that's the reason why when the police are rolling out facial recognition technology, they need to look at the seed data, the fairness of the data that goes into the system, and checking it for potential bias before it's rolled out. So in our facial recognition technology opinion, there's a lot of detail about what the police have to do before they actually roll out the technologies. And one of the requirements in law is for the police to do a data protection impact assessment that really delves into the fairness of the algorithm and the fairness of the technologies. So, I mean, nobody has given the police a blank check to use facial recognition technology. All of those issues have to be built in to safeguard and to make sure it's effective, it's fair, and it's used for intelligence-led investigations where there is a real safety issue for the public, not for everyday scanning of crowds to see if there's pickpockets. This is, I mean, the rollout of facial recognition technology, as I say, is a societal step change, and it needs to be introduced very carefully and only in certain situations.
No, absolutely. There's sort of a related question here, because obviously biometric data, facial data is now being used in a variety of ways, not just by the police. So there's another attendee here asking about the use of face imagery in terms of assessing children's age. I know there are a couple of companies that do this, and they want to know whether or not there are any concerns about the data use, if you like, to train those algorithms being lawfully or unlawfully collected. Is that something that you've looked at all?
That's something that we're looking at right now in the FRT and biometrics in commercial applications. So we will soon to be issuing sort of a companion opinion on the use of FRT in commercial applications. So that is coming soon. We're also doing an investigation with our Australian colleagues of a company called Clearview that is scraping data from the internet and using algorithms and using technologies to sell their services to other commercial and police forces. So there'll be much more, I think, assurance and certainty around commercial use of FRT coming soon.
That's fantastic. I think there'll be lots of us definitely looking out to see what you have to say on that. That'd be great. Wonderful. On to the next question. So it's slightly more of a theoretical one here, but one that I think quite a few of our sort of colleagues and students think about, and particularly in sort of more normative questions about privacy. This is asked by Carolina Alama Marutu. What does digital self-determination mean to you? And what would you point out as the most effective instruments of digital self-determination? Does the current UK, Europe legal data protection framework have the potential to foster digital self-determination?
So digital self-determination means, to me, it means agency and choice over your data. So you have to have the ability in many circumstances to be able to withdraw your consent, access your data, port your data, have full transparency on how it's used and what algorithms are applied to it. So I think the work that we've done on algorithmic transparency, our explain work and our algorithmic auditing tools are really important. But for people, they have to be able to understand in clear terms how their data is used, what's the chain of companies and organizations that are making use of it, having the ability to challenge that directly to companies and government with an independent, well-resourced, modern data protection commissioner that has their back. So I think all of those issues are really, really important, and probably the GDPR, the European regulation, and the UK's Data Protection Act 2018 has created a domino effect. So GDPR has the strongest individual rights for self-determination. The domino effect is starting to hit around the world, where other jurisdictions are saying, we want those same protections for our own citizens. And so, we see the GDPR being transposed into the kind of rights and principles being transposed in laws around the world. So I think it really has, it's only going in one direction, which is improving people's rights.
If I can just ask you to go even further on that, it's not a question from the audience. I mean, one of the things obviously that GDPR introduced is this focus not just on individual pieces of data, but if you like, on the profiling that can stem from that use of data. Do you think, is that an area where we need to go further, do you think, in regulation to really protect that idea of individual self-determination, digital determination? Because we don't really yet have full control, do we, over what our data profiles are used for, how they're used.
We have transparency over that. So transparency is a start. We also have the ability in law to challenge a decision that's made by machines. We have the ability to complain to a regulator who can look into the black box, who can look behind the scenes, but we still have a ways to go. I agree with that. And I think civil society needs to have the right to bring issues to the regulator, because how can an individual spend the time and energy to always assert their rights? So I do think that civil society, academia play a really important role in really fostering individual self-determination over data.
On that note, it was wonderful. You said, was it 500,000 calls you'd received last year? I mean, arguably that's just 500,000 times when things might have been going wrong, but the fact that people are speaking out is brilliant. Okay, let's do another topic shift again. This is Nina Schuller. Do we need to create strong regulation around use of images created as deep fakes?
Sorry, could you repeat that one more?
Sorry. I'll read more of her question, it's quite long. Will we need to create stronger regulation around the use of images created as deep fakes? She says, I can imagine that those with celebrity status might start pushing for more of this regulation, but what implications might this have for facial recognition technology, the processing of images? So yes, any thoughts on deep fakes generally?
I think, deep fakes are obviously very, very concerning, both in the political sphere or pretty much anything. I think the principles that we have in law are helpful. And also, when it comes to criminality, we do have laws in place to be able to deal with deep fakes through criminal law and prosecution. So I'm not sure we need new laws. We just need to enforce the ones that we have.
No, that's fair enough. A more political question next. Gillian Whitehead, you talk about the success of the UK track and trace from a public trust perspective, but obviously we saw flip-flopping around on the provider. There were questions over whether data should be centrally held or not, and delays about the rollout, for example, being rolled out more quickly in other countries like Germany. So Gillian says, I would have thought this might have undermined public confidence and trust. How do you understand public trust on this?
So when I said that the NHS contact tracing app was built with privacy by design, I mean, that's what I was referring to. Yeah. In terms of test and trace as a program as a whole, what we're going to audit is the collection, use, and disclosure and safeguarding of data. So that's our point there. I think the question goes to broader points about contracting out of services, the transparency behind that. These are all areas of public trust, I agree. And I expect that there will be, if not one, but numerous public inquiries into how the government handled both the management of the pandemic and also the recovery from it. So I think these are public trust questions that'll keep us busy for a very long time. But I stand by my assertion that the contact tracing app did actually develop with the public's privacy rights in mind, in a decentralized way that it was designed.
And regardless of who you think did well and didn't well, there was a big public debate about this, which I also think was a real positive. There was a great discussion of the pros and cons of each approach. So yeah, but yeah, time will tell, I guess.
It's so great when you walk down the street and people are actually talking about algorithms, as they did in the A-level exam fiasco. So people are actually discussing algorithms around the dinner table. They're talking about data and democracy in hair salons when we used to be able to go to them. And the fact that these are regular conversations, not just among specialists, means that data protection, I think, has really come of age and hits on all the intersection of law and technology and society. It's by the way, for students that are taking part in this webinar, this is a fantastic time to join, to think about your career in terms of data protection. And we had an Oxford academic, Ruben Binns, was our first postdoctoral AI specialist at the ICO, and we're just launching another competition. So it's a great time to be in data protection. Just a little sales job there.
That's okay. We're very much actually, I was quite jealous of Ruben having been able to go and do that with you. But it's a time when a lot of our students are thinking about where they're going to take their careers. So that's a really good plug. Thank you. In a way, a bit related to this the last point you were making, though, about having conversations around the dinner table or under the hairdryers. I think again, we really do want people to be talking more frequently about data protection issues, but there's still some blind spots. Claire Levens from Internet Matters asks here. She's found, some of their researchers found that although parents are generally concerned about data protection and children, maybe they're not actually concerned enough about data leakages from things like smart devices, say smart speakers in the home, and sometimes convenience trumps concerns. So how do we get parents to care about that data? I would also add another question, I suppose, there, which is, do you think we're still too fixated on text, data as text, so things we type into social media or photos, as opposed to, say, the ambient data that's being collected amongst our IoT devices? So yeah, so how do we encourage people to understand more about the risks of these IoT devices from a data protection perspective?
I think it's going to take a village to get parents and to get educators to really think about the more ambient collection of data. And a lot of it goes to who's responsible for digital education and making people good digital citizens. How can it needs to be obviously embedded in our education system. Parents need to learn more. I think offices like ours and Ofcom with research and education mandates need to do more. But the part of the problem is the pace of change, the pace of take up of technology versus the snail pace of law reform. So I think we have to be innovative, and we can't wait for the laws to change or to increase or get stronger or give us more powers as regulators. I think we as a community have to realize that our lives are more and more online, and we just have to be aware of that. So it's, as I say, it's going to take a village, including educators and academics and others.
No, obviously I would agree with that. So we're coming towards the end, I think, of our session, and I suppose I wanted to have the last question myself, if that's okay. I said at the beginning, so you're coming to the end of your term. It's October, isn't it? I think it was extended. Was that when you finish? Yeah. So my goodness, all the things that you've seen during your term, as you say, everything from Brexit to the pandemic, all these new technologies like facial recognition, so on, that providing new pieces of work for you. what are you leaving for your successor? What will they find on their desk when they come in, if you like? Will it be the same issues you've had the last few years, or do you think there'll be sort of brand new challenges that they will have to think about?
Well, what my successor is going to inherit is a fantastic team, and I've been privileged to be able to really develop the capacity of the office. When I started in 2016, there was one technologist. Now we have a whole department. We have bridges with academia and civil society and industry. We have a secondment program, and I do think, well, we're twice the size of an office as we were in 2016. But my successor is going to have what I've seen in the last 5 years, which is constant change, need to be innovative, need to make sure you're picking the right files that actually will help others understand what their responsibilities are. And you mentioned earlier about fines being a good dissuasive tool, but you have to pick the right companies, right issues, and describe it properly. So I think that the regulator in this space will need to ensure that they continue to work with partners, with other regulators to get this right, because the public cares about data protection. The public cares and and are concerned about content online. And so really, we haven't even got to the point where Internet of Things is just a regular part of our life. So I do think that the person who takes on the ICO next will just have to be comfortable about ambiguity, about fast-paced change, and the need to look outside the office to be able to find many voices and much expertise, because this is so different than 15 years ago when data protection was a back office issue with a few, I was going to say nerdy academics, but I mean,
nerdy, it's fine, you can say it.
It's nerdy, but I mean, it's just exploded. This area of law and policy has exploded in the last few years, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, Vicky.
No, nor me. And who'd have predicted we'd get to where we do? Can I just ask, is the selection process open actually for your successor, or is it yet to be opened up?
It opened this week. So there's under the public appointments process, it's open for a month for applications, and it's definitely a privilege to lead that organization. So I will, of course, wish my successor all the very best.
And we obviously owe you a huge vote of thanks for all the excellent work you've done in leading the institution over the last few years. And I hope you're going to get a bit of a rest at the end of this. I'm so sorry to all those of you that didn't manage to ask your questions. This has been a hugely popular event. The recording will go up, I believe, shortly. But if I can just finish by thanking not only you as an audience for your engagement with the topic, but most importantly, obviously, to our excellent speaker, Elizabeth Denham. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both, and again, thanks again to the audience for attending and for putting such interesting questions into the Q&A as well. For our next Wednesday webinar, we will have Professor Philip Howard, who will be hosting Catherine Mayer, CEO and Executive Director of the Wikimedia Foundation, discussing the future of knowledge governance, sharing and creating knowledge for all. And that one's at the 10th of March at 6 p.m. UK time. So please do visit our events page on the OI website to register and sign up for this. Thank you again to Elizabeth and for Victoria for your time. We really appreciate it, and we wish everyone a really wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.